Alrighty, welcome everyone to our week 11 lecture presentation. We are actually starting to come to the close of the semester, if you can believe it, but November starts and then we are well on our way. So this week we're talking about editing in the discussion board. So I thought I'd give you some different tools and tips to help you along. So what to expect for this particular presentation, we're going to talk about the difference between revising and editing. I also have some information about different sentence structure elements, and then how to revise using what's called the paramedic method, which is a really cool method that is shaped by the Kaplan University Writing Center. So something to look into as well. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing I want to just talk about is what is the difference between revising and editing. A lot of people use these terms synonymously, but I have to say that they are not the same thing. So my question up here is, are they the same thing? And I'm going to say no, they're not, although they are found in a very similar place in the writing process. So we think about the writing process, we have the brainstorming stage, the invention stage of writing, then we have drafting. Once you've drafted, you revise. The final stage is to edit before you turn in that final paper, or what we call publish it. So revision and editing is a little bit different. So why do we do these things? So there is a common misconception that only bad writers have to edit and revise their work. This is not correct at all. The best writers in the world are often obsessive revisers. That's why their writing is so great. So they've taken the extra time to make it so. I think I've mentioned this before in the discussion board, but E.B. White, the author of Charlotte's Web, said the best writing is rewriting. And I even remember when I was taking my master's courses, I had to write this really, really long paper called a master's thesis. And if you ever do go after your master's degree, you might have to write one too. But it had to be super long, like at least 35 pages or something like that. But my paper started off as 12, and then with the help of an awesome advisor, I revised that paper about 5 times, and I probably would have done it even more if I had time, but it ended up being 45 pages long, what it needed to be. So it was good to revise for it because it actually got me where I needed to be. But we're not, of course, going to make you write any 35-page long paper, but revision is definitely very helpful in terms of making your writing the best that it possibly can be. So how do we look at revision? Revision, look at the word. It's re and vision. So re, we know, means to do again, or to so vision is to see. So from the Latin, we know that revision means to see again. So when we revise, we are actually looking at the paper in a new way. We want to see the work in a new way, and that's what we're looking towards. So what does revision entail? So this is what we call here in the teacher world our higher order concerns, the HOCs. These are whole paper issues. So that could be, your thesis statement, your focus, your purpose. It could be the organization, the flow, are a nice term of flow that people use, but cohesion that we've talked about earlier in the semester, considering the audience. All of those things are revision elements, things that we look at when we revise a paper. So editing, also known as proofreading, is a little different. So if we're looking at big issues with revising, what do you think editing would be doing? So it's still in that realm of working toward making your paper better, but editing actually has to do with what we call lower order concerns, or LOCs. And these are the things that are not as big of a deal. Yes, they are important in writing, but it's not those big picture items. So these are things like word choice, concision, so are your words precise, sentence structure, transitions from one paragraph to the next, or between sentences, spelling, grammar, punctuation, typos even. This says APA format check, sorry. That should be MLA format check. So editing and proofreading encompass all of these elements. So I did want to talk a little bit about editing and kind of break things down a bit. I think that when I first started teaching, I taught college level, but it was what's called developmental classes. So these are for students that didn't quite make it into Composition 1 as college freshmen, and so they were learning more of the basics of English and of writing and reading to help them prepare for college English. So one of the things that I found is that a lot of times people don't understand the very basic setup of a sentence, and therefore it's really hard to apply punctuation marks correctly, to apply word choice correctly, because the basics are kind of looked over or kind of glossed over because, oh, you should have known that way back in elementary school. But if somebody doesn't learn the things correctly way back in elementary school, or doesn't have those reinforced, it makes it even harder to create clear sentences that are punctuated and set up correctly. So I like to kind of bring it down to the basics and really look at what a sentence is and how do we build on the very basic sentence structure. So all sentences have to have two elements. They have to have a noun and they have to have a verb. So they have to have a subject, something that is doing something, and they have to have a verb, which is whatever they're doing. So this can be very simple, like what I have down here. I have I am. That is a sentence. We have I as the subject and am as the verb, and that works. We ran. That's also a complete sentence. We is the subject, ran is the verb, and that's all we need. But sometimes you get more complicated trying to explain different parts, either the noun or the verb, trying to make those more complex, and then we miss the actual structure. So in red, I have some incomplete sentences. We have the girl in the yellow and white striped dress. Well, what we have here is an incomplete sentence. We only have a subject, the girl. And yes, we have these modifiers, we have these more details about the girl, but she ultimately is not doing anything in this sentence. So we don't have a complete sentence. We don't have a noun, or we don't have a verb to complete this subject. And then we look at the next one, jumping up and down. Okay, so we have a verb, jumping, and we actually have some more modifiers, something to tell us what the jumping is, they're jumping up and down, but we don't have a subject. There's nothing doing this verb. Who is jumping up and down? What is jumping up and down? We have no idea. So this is also not a complete sentence. So what does a sentence have to have? It has to have a subject and it has to have a verb. It has to have a noun and a verb, which a noun or pronoun, but it needs to have a subject. So then, once you know what a sentence is and what that entails, you can start moving into clauses. And this is not Santa Claus, okay? Clauses are groups of words that work together to create some sort of idea. Now, there are two different clauses I want to talk about today, and that is an independent clause and a dependent clause. So an independent clause is a group of words that work together to create a complete thought and can stand on their own as complete sentences. So this is any complete sentence that is a basic, simple sentence is going to be an independent clause. So Karen ran to the store. Even if we just said Karen ran, that would be an independent clause. The ship sailed at midnight. That's a simple sentence. It has a subject. It has a verb. That's an independent clause. A dependent clause is a group of words that work together but cannot stand on their own as a sentence. So these are dependent. So this clause is dependent on another clause to make sense. So we have, and I've changed those sentences that were independent clauses before. I've actually made them dependent with a little bit of a change. So here we have, while Karen ran to the store. I added the word while, and what happened is we don't know what happened while she ran to the store. So the sentence is not complete. The thought is not complete because we don't know what happened while she did that. And same with the next one. If the ship sailed at midnight. Okay, what happens if it sailed at midnight? I don't know. If. So those words, while and if, are dependent words, things that make us want to know what happens next. And so these are dependent clauses. They are not complete sentences because they are reliant on something else to complete the thought. Now, once you know what a complete sentence is, once you know what these clauses are, you can then start to build complex and compound sentences. So a complex sentence is when these are sentences that contain both independent and dependent clauses. And then a compound sentence happens when two complete sentences or two independent clauses are added together with a coordinated conjunction or a semicolon. So that's a compound sentence, so you add things together. So you can have both of these together in one sentence. It would be called a compound complex. So this is when you connect different elements together. So you can actually build these up as you go. But it's important to know that if you are putting together two complete sentences, independent clause, you have to have a coordinating conjunction, and or a semicolon, coordinating conjunction with a comma or a semicolon. So what I've done here is I've created several what I call compound and complex equations. So these are my kind of Grammarly equations on how to set up different sentence structures. And I have, of course, our variables. So we have IC, which means independent clause, and DC, which means dependent clause. And then we use, instead of plus and minus and that kind of stuff, we're actually using punctuation marks. So this is not exhaustive. There are several different ways that you can connect clauses into these compound and complex sentences. I just have some examples here. And a very simple compound sentence would be an independent clause with a semicolon and then another independent clause. You could also do the same kind of structure with a conjunction and a comma. So it would be independent clause, comma, conjunction, and then another independent clause. If you are going to connect an independent or a dependent clause to an independent clause, it's a little bit different. You could see here, if you start with the dependent clause, then the dependent clause needs to have a comma after it and then followed by an independent clause. If you switch the order with the independent clause first, then it should be followed by a dependent clause. Notice there's no punctuation mark anywhere in between those two. So this is important to notice when you are thinking about using comma placement in your sentences. If you have a dependent clause coming first, while Karen was walking to the store, we need to have a comma and then finish the sentence. She ran into an old friend. And then if we switch the order, she ran into an old friend while walking to the store, we would know that we don't have to have a punctuation mark between those two clauses. So that's important to note. And then you can start adding these together to make them more complex and more compound. So we have DC, comma, IC, semicolon, so then we're creating that compound idea, DC, comma, IC. You could do that same kind of thing with different mixes of clauses. So here I have independent clause, comma, conjunction, and then dependent clause, comma, independent clause. So there's lots of different ways that you can add these together, but the point would be to understand that if you have a dependent clause coming before an independent clause, you need a comma between them. And if you're going to add two independent clauses, no matter how disconnected they are from one another, so this one has a dependent clause between them, you still need to either use a semicolon or a comma and conjunction. And then you could really build any number of combinations. So I have some examples here. My first one from the last slide, so IC, semicolon, IC. I have Karen ran to the store, semicolon, she forgot the milk. And this would be completely fine. But you might want to use a conjunction instead to make them connect a little better. So that would be Karen ran to the store, comma, but she forgot the milk. And those might flow better together in this instance. A dependent clause, comma, and then independent clause. While she was on her way, comma, she ran into an old friend. Now if we switch those, she ran into an old friend while she was on her way. So we don't have to have that comma before while if the clauses are switched. Now, you might have noticed at the beginning when I talked about the two different types of clauses, I just added words while and if before those complete sentences, those independent clauses, and made them dependent. What I have here is a list of words that do that. So if you have a complete sentence like Jane walked the dog, if you added any of these words before Jane, then you would create a dependent clause. So because Jane walked the dog, or since Jane walked the dog, if Jane walked the dog, how Jane walked the dog, supposing that Jane walked the dog. You can see that any of those, when you add one of these words to the beginning, make it so we need to know what happens after Jane walked the dog. So all of these are what we call dependent words. They each have other types of names, but we call words that make a sentence or make a clause dependent words. But I think this list is pretty helpful in terms of being able to identify when you have a dependent clause in your paper, so then you know whether or not you need to have a comma that comes after it. So let's let you look at that for a little bit. And also, I've mentioned the word conjunction so far, and there are a certain number of conjunctions. I like to use the acronym FANBOYS, and you might see that a lot, to remember all of the conjunctions. And these are words that you can use to help add independent clauses together with the help of a comma. So the different coordinating conjunctions are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So you can see the first letter of each of those create the acronym FANBOYS. Easy way to remember it. So those are just some tips on how to create sentence structures that are correct and appropriate. Now, when you're editing, you might also look for word choice. That's another one of those lower order concerns. So this is from the Kaplan University Writing Center. So if you check that out, you can find the paramedic method of revision. And this is a technique for cutting wordiness out of your draft. And it takes the steps that I'm going to talk about. So first thing you want to do is if you have your paper printed out, that'd probably be helpful. And you don't want to do this with the entire paper because that can get really difficult. But if you find that a specific paragraph or section of your paper seems really wordy, then you can use this method. So the first thing you want to do is have a couple highlighters available and go through the section of your work and find all forms of to be and to have. So this could be is, are, was, were, has, have, had, all those kinds of words. So find all of those and highlight them. Or if you don't have highlighters, you can use a pencil and underline them. That's fine. And then you could then go back and highlight all of the prepositions. Prepositions are those words that indicate placement or direction. So I like to think of it in terms of a squirrel at a tree. Okay, so a squirrel in a tree. The squirrel can go above the tree, over the tree, under the tree, around the tree, all those things. So all the things that the squirrel can do can be a preposition, right? And those would be directional words. And highlight all of those preposition words. Now, that could also be several others. So I do suggest that you do a little Google search and find all your prepositions that can be helpful to you. And then delete all the highlighted words. So all the prepositions, all the to be, and all the to have words. And replace them with verbs that are actually doing something, so that are actually engaging. So we're going to try to remove these less engaging words and add more engaging words. So for example, I have a sentence here, and I've done all the to be words in blue and the prepositions in red. Excuse me. So the little girl was found safe at the mall down the street after being declared missing for 10 days. So all the blue words are to be and to have words, and then all the red words are prepositions: at, down, after, and 4. So in terms of a squirrel, we know that 4 would be a difficult thing to do to a tree. So there are some prepositions that don't actually apply to my squirrel and tree example, but you can get the idea. So let's then look at how we could revise this. So then we take out all those blue and red words and then come up with something different. So police discovered the little girl safe 10 days later at the local mall. So did we get rid of all the prepositions? No. But instead of using a passive voice was found, we use a more active voice discovered. So it actually feels more in the now, it's more engaging, and it's less wordy. So we don't have a really long sentence. We have a short, concise sentence that's also more engaging because of the word choice.